Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of what if Deku treated death like a minor inconvenience? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. Chapter 13. Notes. Special thanks to Sunflower Tea on my Discord for beta reading this chapter. AO3 name Santipat. See the end of the chapter for more notes. Shoyuta stared blankly at the papers and laptop in front of him, the soft glow of the screen reflecting almost eerily in his dark black eyes. His fingers were clasped, propping up his chin as his elbows rested on the coffee table. This was much worse than Shoyuta originally thought. In front of him, there were two files. One that Shoyuta recognized as Yue's, one that he himself has contributed to, the other from Aldra Junior High. Both were for one specific problem child with forest green hair, enough determination to fill an ocean, questionable self-preservation at best, who went by the name Midoriya Izuku. And in a true demonstration and reflection of the problem child brand, both files were night and day in comparison. And definitely not in a good way. Normally, UA's teachers never get the chance to review a junior high file of a student. It's an unwritten rule set in place to prevent bias and leave judgment of characters strictly for the teachers, so no preconceived notions can form from the opinions of previous teachers. Nedzu is usually the only one who even touches these files. In a way, this rule lets students have a chance at a fresh start. That doesn't necessarily mean that a UA teacher cannot look through a file. It's just something that doesn't happen very often, especially for students doing particularly well. There's usually never a need to. And this is exactly why. In Midoriya's Aldra file, he is described as a troublemaker. That in itself is not exactly inaccurate. He is a problem child by definition, and trouble is just par for the course. That being said, this file paints Midoriya as a disruptive, attention-craving, antagonistic liar. What even? Shoyuta can picture the first day like it was yesterday. He can see in almost perfect clarity the way Midoriya was constantly racked with nervous jitters, the way he shrank back from attention like it would smite him down, the way his eyes would light up with pure determination to succeed despite all the odds stacked against him with his wayward, destructive quirk. Shoyuta would describe Midoriya as fawn-legged, shaky, nervous, unconfident, skittish, and generally the opposite of what he was expecting. Before, Shoyuta figured that Midoriya hadn't trained a lick of his quirk. He thought that Midoriya was someone who believed he could skirt by with just his strong quirk that splintered his bones to smithereens and nothing else. Of course, Shoyuta couldn't have been more wrong. Truthfully, at the time, he just couldn't look over how quickly Midoriya's quirk put him out of commission. Kaminari had a similar problem, but at least he wasn't irreparably destroying himself each time he activated his quirk. Shoyuta had thought to himself, this kid is going to die, and he is going to die fast, and decided to give Midoriya an ultimatum at the ball throw. Get that quirk under control, or get expelled before the world of heroics destroys you. And in true problem child fashion, Midoriya made himself a third option by still destroying himself but only slightly. And by God, of course Shoyuta would give him a chance, just for that crazy but showing. And like one big fed up Solsi, Shoyuta comes back to the Aldra file and is baffled all over again. Not once in that first day impression would Shoyuta describe Midoriya as someone who was disruptive, attention-craving, antagonistic, or most of all a liar. Unprepared? Definitely. Nervous? Totally. Antagonistic? Foe. Shoyuta let out a deep, slightly trembling sigh, bringing a hand up to rub at his temples as he tried to put his scattered thoughts together. In that file, there were accounts of times where Midoriya had supposedly cheated on tests, disrupted class, whatever the hell that actually meant. It's not like it ever said how antagonized students and instigated fights of all things. It was all a bunch of pure, unadulterated bullshit. How does Shoyuta know this? If, for some reason, his own personal account of Midoriya's character wasn't enough, then the cherry on top is one important little fact that has slipped by Shoyuta for so long. Midoriya Izuku's quirk was never registered until the day of the FING entrance exam. What the actual FING sheet? And it somehow gets just that slight bit worse when Shoyuta realized that technically Midoriya's quirk wasn't even registered that day. It was just accepted as so when in all actuality, the date the quirk registry was officially updated was almost a week after the exams had taken place. Nezu FING knew. Chio probably FING knew. And for some ungodly reason, nobody told Shoyuta? Did it never cross their minds that this was important FING information that Shoyuta Midoriya's goddamn teacher should know? If Shoyuta had known, he would have started Midoriya on after-school training a whole lot sooner instead of just recently. He would have forced Midoriya into a quirk counselor's office immediately, because guess what? Midoriya's never been to one of those either. Midoriya didn't even get one solitary day to figure out his quirk before the exam when everyone else had around 11 years on him. He didn't get a chance to figure it out. He didn't get a chance at all. And yet, Midoriya figured it out anyway. If that isn't a testament to the kid's resourcefulness, smarts, wit, will, and sheer determination, Shoyuta doesn't know what is. And despite himself, Shoyuta found himself grinning. Yes, the situation was F-ed beyond belief. He will definitely be having words and quite possibly throwing hands, but at least it didn't deter Midoriya as much as it probably should have. Shoyuta couldn't be more proud. Leaning back, Shoyuta let himself sink into his fondly named crisis couch and just breathed. There were probably still some things he missed that will slap him upside the head later. He doesn't doubt that for a second. If anything, this feels more like a beginning. To what exactly, Shoyuta couldn't tell you, but the feeling's still there. For now though, Shoyuta was content plotting the thousands of ways he was going to wreak certain people's sheet. It was going to be great. Suspension. Ochako can't say she's ever experienced it, but she supposed Yue was a bit more harsh on some things, or maybe it was just a Nezu thing. Nezu had told her that, because of the LOV and recent uptick in villain activity, they couldn't do a traditional suspension where she would be sent home for a couple of days, so instead she would be essentially grounded to the dorms. She couldn't train, or get any notes, homework, or recounts of any lessons from anyone, which was something Ochako wasn't expecting and honestly couldn't understand at all. All it would do would hold her back in the end. This entire situation was bullshit. It was all complete and utter bullshit. Her visit to the principal hadn't been anything like she was expecting, and she couldn't understand why. There was no shouting, no disappointed faces, no condescending tones, and no patronizing words. Just brutal reasoning. Of course, it still frustrated her to no end that nobody was listening to her if they could just see how Deku's new friends had been influencing him. Nezu also, infuriatingly, had a point. You haven't actually talked to Midoriya, have you? Nezu was right. She hadn't talked to Deku. Not even a little bit. She'd just been hiding away with Ida, Tsu, and everyone else she'd been hanging out with recently. Ochako just left everything to Todoroki, thinking that maybe he might be able to slap some sense into Deku, not even considering for a second Todoroki might fail. That's a coward's way out, and there was no way around that, that's for sure. Ochako huffed a bit to herself and looked over at her crappy dorm fan, watching it spin fast enough that she could barely make out the individual blades. The white noise it made was a welcome distraction. She didn't want to be a coward, she wasn't one. She wasn't. But she'd still done the easy, cowardly thing and practically hid from the person she was trying to help. Maybe she was expecting Deku to come around on his own at some point. Maybe she hoped the problem would solve itself. Clearly it didn't. Clearly, no amount of accusations would solve the problem. Clearly, no amount of yelling would bring Deku back. Ochako's mouth felt dry. It was starting to bug her, and it only got worse the more she thought about it. It bugged her almost enough to drown out the whispered doubts that maybe she was wrong. Sitting up abruptly, Ochako quietly made her way out of her dorm and down towards the kitchen. It was dark out, probably way past the time she should be asleep. On the way, Ochako made an empty promise to herself that she would fall asleep after getting some water. Yawning and rubbing her eyes, she made it almost all the way down the stairs before something caught her eye when she reached the last step. She squinted a bit at the unexpected light coming from the common room, one that didn't illuminate the whole floor, just the kitchen area. Guess she wasn't the only one out on a midnight adventure. Sighing, she continued on, keeping her steps light as she finally reached the kitchen. What she found had her freezing right then and there. Deku was here. Ochako could feel the breath leaving her lungs as she took in the sight in front of her. Deku was leaning up against the kitchen counter, looking at his phone with what looked like a bored expression, sipping periodically at some water without a care. He looked tired. Ochako didn't know how long she stood there, just staring. It could have been a couple seconds, or even a couple hours. She would honestly believe either. All she knew is that when Deku finally looked up from his phone, she found herself unable to breathe properly. Deku's expression held no surprise or shock at Ochako's presence. In fact, he seemed indifferent, apathetic, almost. Like he just couldn't find the will to give a single sheet. It was a difficult expression to try and process. Ochako didn't understand what it meant. It internally frustrated her to no end, but when she looked into those dark green eyes that seemed to stare right into her, yet finding nothing, it's like her voice just decided to abandon ship and leave her for dead. So instead of saying anything, Ochako numbly walked into the kitchen. She quickly found a cup, filled it with water, and just kinda stood there dumbly watching as the water rippled marginally in her grasp. She took a sip of her water, using the action as an excuse to look up at Deku again. She almost wished she hadn't when she saw that Deku just went back to his phone, like whatever obviously boring thing he was looking at was more interesting than anything else at the moment. That seemed to help Ochako finally find her voice again. Hey, though, Ochako started before getting cut off with a quiet "ich" from Deku. Just like Deku's expression, his acknowledgement was just as lackluster and indifferent. Part of Ochako wondered if it was even a prompt to continue at all. She did anyway. About earlier, look, I just want you to give me a chance to hear me out. Ochako said firmly. She got nothing but a blank look as a response. I just want you to consider that. Ochako hesitated. She thought back to what Nedza said, about how Deku was changing, adapting, whatever. He definitely was. Ochako could see it clear as day. What if it wasn't for the better? I don't think Deku, you've changed. A lot. You seem a lot more bitter and completely unlike yourself. Just consider that maybe you're friends. Deku sighed. It was so sharp Ochako almost flinched at the sound. Suddenly, Deku looked so much more exhausted. It was a weariness that looked bone deep, a kind of tiredness that couldn't be fixed by just sleep or rest. He looked like he wanted to be anywhere but where he was. Ochako could only watch as Deku downed the rest of his water, quickly slipping his phone into his pocket before he started making his way out of the kitchen. He walked right by Ochako without even sparing her a second glance. "W!" Ochako exclaimed, whipping around in an attempt to stop Deku before getting shot down with the unimpressed stare she received. "You don't have the right to talk shit about them like that," Deku said with a soft whisper that was somehow so tangibly strained and heavy with an unimaginable weight. The words themselves were scathing and harsh, but under it all, Deku sounded more hurt than anything. "Wabi, but I'm your friend. I have a right to be concerned about you," Ochako tried to reason desperately. "This isn't concern, Uraraka, you might not remember it, but you hurt me and you've only continued to," Deku said tiredly, turning his back to Ochako once more. "Do you remember what you said? Do you remember the name of that girl you dismissed as weaker and beneath everyone else on the news? Maybe it's not fair of me to have not talked about it properly, but what you and everyone else said wasn't fair either," Deku said with so much bitterness, yet so much conviction. Ochako was taken aback. It doesn't matter that she was quirkless, it doesn't matter if she was weak-willed or strong-willed, it doesn't matter if this was better or worse for her, none of that matters when, at the end of the day, she still felt like death was the better option, Deku said with a strong, yet shaky voice, bringing up a hand to card roughly through his hair. "You can be the strongest, smartest, most capable and still reach that point. You don't have the right to essentially say it was her own fault that she had it coming because of something she couldn't control. You don't have the right to accuse Shinso of something he can't even physically do." Deku whipped his head around again, making direct eye contact with a frozen Ochako. She swore his eyes glowed with an intensity that rivaled any sun. Deku took in a shuddering breath that seemed to rack through his whole body, before he let it out slowly and walked away. He lingered at the exit of the kitchen for a moment, before whispering so quietly Ochako almost didn't hear. "You don't have the right to try and fix what's not broken. Hey Toshinori, how's it been?" Naomasa asked conversationally, as he nursed a warm cup of coffee in his hand. Fitting he was in a coffee shop after all. Thank you for meeting with me, my old friend. And as for how I've been, it's been going, Toshinori said almost airily as he sat himself in front of Naomasa. Oh come on, please don't call me old. You'll only make me stress about my impending mortality more than I already do, Naomasa said with a joking air, but still truthfully. Being unable to lie is certainly a challenging quirk side effect sometimes. Toshinori laughed heartily, before abruptly falling into a coughing fit. Naomasa frowned, silently offering a napkin that Toshinori took gratefully. So, what did you want to talk about? Is it about All for One, your hero ing career, or something else? Naomasa gently prompted, taking a sip of his coffee. It was a rare thing for Toshinori to plan a casual little get-together, especially recently. So it was kind of obvious he was after some kind of advice for something or another. Wouldn't be the first time. Am I that obvious? Toshinori asked sheepishly, rubbing the back of his neck awkwardly. Yes, Naomasa said without remorse. It was the truth after all. Ah, well I was hoping you could give me some advice for mentorship? Toshinori asked like it was a question. Mentorship? Is it something about your successor? Naomasa asked. Yeah, a little bit. He's doing this exercise, I think, with Aizawa? I don't know, he just hasn't really been using his quirk at all, Toshinori admitted. Well then. Really? I'm honestly surprised Shoyuta didn't have him do something like this sooner. Shuta's usually really good at building from the ground up and all that, Naomasa commented offhandedly. Naomasa found it odd for Shoyuta to let Midoriya use his quirk like that for so long. What do you mean? Toshinori asked, confusion painting his features. Naomasa paused. Well, you gave Midoriya one for all pretty close to the entrance exams, right? Way too close in my personal opinion, Naomasa grumbled a bit pointedly at the end. Toshinori nodded. Well, then it only makes logical sense Shoyuta would start by teaching him quirkless fighting while safely developing his quirk more on the side so he doesn't fall as far behind. I mean, he does know Midoriya didn't get his quirk until recently, right? Naomasa questioned just to make sure. Toshinori couldn't be that dumb, right? Right? Toshinori looked to the side, avoiding eye contact. Really? Toshinori, Naomasa needed an answer. No? Toshinori conceded after a moment's hesitation. Seriously? But why didn't you tell him? If not about one for all, then just some BS excuse about being a late bloomer or something. It's not that hard, Naomasa stressed, his voice coming out a bit strained. I didn't think I needed to. You know, the less people know about one for all the better, Toshinori said, trying to defend himself a bit. That's not an excuse, Toshinori, Naomasa sighed, bringing his forehead down to rest in his hand. Midoriya needs his own circle in the know too, so he doesn't go bats hit insane. You should know how heavy the burden of one for all is, especially for someone as young as Midoriya, Naomasa said, trying hard to hit his point home. He seems to be doing fine, Toshinori mumbled. Hell no. Toshinori. You told me yourself that Midoriya didn't stop breaking his bones all the time until after you sent him off to Torino. That's way too many bones broken. You're the Class A heroics teacher, Shoyuta. Can only figure out so much without being told shit like this. Naomasa could feel his voice slowly rising the more frustrated he got. Do you know what Shoyuta probably thought when Midoriya came in on the first day? He probably thought Midoriya was someone who believed he could make it as a hero with a quirk that seemed to only destroy himself without anything else. He was probably under the impression he's visited countless quirk counselors, tried every trick in the book, and after 11 years his quirk still destroys his bones. I remember you clearly ranting to me about how he originally tried to fight Midoriya's placement in the hero course after the exams, and this is probably why. Yes, maybe he could have started to try working with Midoriya sooner on his own accord, but again, that's also your job as his main heroics teacher and mentor. Naomasa was panting a bit after finishing his piece, coming down from his high of emotion and exertion. Naomasa looked up at Toshinori with a sad disappointment. Toshinori looked like a kicked puppy, but Naomasa couldn't find it in himself to feel sorry for it this time. They both sat in silence for a while. Toshinori looked like he didn't quite know what to say, and Naomasa was honestly done saying anything. Naomasa closed his eyes. I want you to consider telling Shoyuta about One for All. Because if you don't, I will, Naomasa said quietly, before getting up from his seat. Naomasa's coffee sat cold and forgotten. Notes. Sorry for the decent wait for this one. I've been working a bit more on my other FIC Light A match. Watch it burn. Also, I actually almost cried writing this. It's almost unreasonably easy to get emotional while writing in general, and it really got me here. Come scream at me on my Discord. The people there are fun to talk to and sometimes help with writing by voting and giving ideas. All that fun stuff. Discord. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Chapter 14. Notes. Warning. Mentions of suicide. See the end of the chapter for more notes. Hey Kyuka? Would it be alright if I talk to you for a second? Kyuka looked up from her phone to find Momo standing awkwardly beside her, a spoon of breakfast cereal held up to her mouth, frozen mid-bite. Some milk dripped back down into her bowl. You don't have to, of course, but if you want to humor me, Momo trailed off, rubbing her arm while she endeavored to not make eye contact. Kyuka dropped her spoon back into the bowl. Blinking slowly, Kyuka took in a deep breath, and sighed a resigned sort of sigh that could only be made at the beginning of a day, only to figure out that, oh, it's one of those days, huh? Sure, shoot, Kyuka said, trying to keep from yawning. She ignored the sudden heaviness in her chest. Oh, thank you, Momo said, pulling out a chair right next to Kyuka. Well, I'll start off by saying that, and everyone else was wondering what happened? Kyuka played with her spoon, moving bits of her cereal around with it. Gonna have to be more specific than that, Momo, Kyuka said in her normal dry tone, though it lacked much else in the way of emotion. Momo cleared her throat, blushing slightly. Sorry, I guess I meant, what happened with you and Midoriya? We all thought you were trying to figure him out just like the rest of us, but then you stopped talking to us, to me, and suddenly you were basically right beside him. Momo recounted, her brows furrowed slightly. After a moment, Kyuka ate some of her cereal. It was soggy. You're right, I was trying to figure it out, but not like the rest of you, Kyuka said, looking Momo right in the eyes. I wanted more information, confirmation, and I was right. That's all. Kyuka answered simply. And what were you right about? Momo asked hesitantly, meeting Kyuka's eyes directly for the first time that morning. Kyuka was too tired for this. I don't know, Momo, you're smart, what do you think? Kyuka asked back in a tired voice, no bite coming through despite there definitely being room for it. Momo was silent for a minute, pondering. I think Midoriya is mad, that much is clear. And I think you're mad too, Momo said, looking sad. Truth be told, I don't remember much of what everyone was doing when Midoriya broke his glass that one day. We were all just watching TV like we always do in the evenings. I think I was more shocked about how mad Midoriya appeared at the time to really remember much else, Momo admitted. It was a suicide story, Momo. The suicide of a quirkless girl, Kyuka grit out weakly. Momo looked even more sad at that, before brightening up a bit in recognition. Oh yes. I remember now. It sparked a debate about the quirkless, and evolutionarily how they differ from the quirked. Apparently, they're born with a bunch of extra, useless parts, including but not limited to the famous extra toe joint. I've noticed people who are quirkless are much more likely to have mental problems and commit suicide. And I know I'm no brain specialist, but I thought that maybe it was some mental weakness similar to the extra parts, as it's thought that most animals aside from humans can't even commit suicide despite animals sometimes exhibiting behavior like it, so maybe quirked. Momo just stop. Please, Kyuka pleaded. Normally, Kyuka didn't mind Momo's information and theory vomit, but not now. Not now. Momo blinked owlishly, before shrinking back slightly. Oh, do you think Midoriya is mad that we turned that tragedy around into a discussion? Now that I think about it, that was probably incredibly careless. Momo, Kyuka said quietly as she tried desperately to ignore the burning behind her eyes. Momo stopped talking, just looking at Kyuka with what looked like withering confidence. Did you know my cousin is quirkless? He's real nice, a bit quirky, and sometimes purposefully annoying, but nice company regardless, Kyuka suddenly said, getting up to empty her cereal bowl and keeping herself turned away from the lingering gaze of Momo. She didn't really feel hungry anymore. He's waxed poetic about how he was going to be a famous rock star one day, and the way he said it made me believe it, Kyuka said, leaning her elbows against the counter by the sink. But no one wants to work with someone quirkless. The showbiz is just too hard for him. It would eat him alive, and he'll never be good enough for the big stage, Kyuka said, making air quotes with her fingers. He's been rejected more times than I can count. Been spat on and kicked till he was down, sometimes literally. By all accounts his dream should have stayed a dream, and he would have been lucky to find some run-down office that barely paid workers a legal wage, or been smart enough to go completely illegal and deal in drugs or weapons, or literally anything that would get him money to live, Kyuka said, voice getting harsher and harsher with her emotions. But he made it. Eventually he realized a physical stage with bright lights wasn't cutting it for him. So instead he looked at it differently. He made an anonymous account on HeroTube, made his identity invisible, put on a costume, a mask, and made the music he wanted to make all by himself. And eventually he made it that way, Kyuka said, voice lightening up slightly. Kyuka glanced back at Momo, but didn't turn fully around. Now why, Momo, should he have to do that? Clearly he is good enough. He not only works hard, but he also works smart. He has the skills. He has the drive, the desire, even the people now. Was he just unlucky? Is there some genetic weakness that made those agents blow him off without a second thought? Kyuka challenged, voice hard and eyes bright. It's prejudice, Momo. Not much else to it. Same with how some people don't get jobs or opportunities because of obvious physical mutations or scary, villainous quirks. Kyuka sighed, glancing away from Momo once more before she looked at her phone and made a face after seeing what time it was. It's almost time for class. Gotta go get ready, Kyuka muttered before trotting off, not looking back. You should go get ready too. Kyuka didn't see the heartbroken look on Momo's face. Midoriya. Todoroki. Midoriya and Todoroki stared each other down, made slightly comedic by the fact they both held lunch trays while they did it. Or at least, Nito thought so. Nito himself had already dropped his tray down and had started to dig in when Mr. Canadian Flag decided to grace them with his presence. Nito can still picture Todoroki falling flat on his face after getting his butt thoroughly hooped in perfect clarity, and he will never be ashamed of how he made it a core memory to be kept forever and always. The thought made him smirk to himself before he shoved more food into his face. Then suddenly, completely out of left field, Todoroki slammed his food tray on the table and bent himself into a perfect 180-degree bow reminiscent of one of Ida's trademarks. Idly, Nito thought Todoroki ought to be more careful, lest he get copyrighted. Midoriya, I'm sorry I couldn't help you if there's anything. Todoroki, stand down. This isn't about All Might, Midoriya said, face weirdly amused. Todoroki slowly stood back up. What? Nito almost choked on his food at the face Todoroki made. It look like his brain had ceased. Todoroki has stopped working. But secret love child. Todoroki, I am not All Might's secret love child. I was never All Might's secret love child. And I won't ever be All Might's secret love child, Midoriya said, voice dry. That's exactly what a secret love child would say, Todoroki said almost petulantly. What the actual F dash? Todoroki, it doesn't matter. I'm not using my quirk because of anything like that anyway. I'm doing this for myself and to make a point. Find the point, Todoroki, Midoriya said, voice getting drier by the minute. Todoroki looked about ready to have a crisis right then and there. Right in front of Nito's FNG meal. I didn't use my fire because I wanted to make a point too, Todoroki mumbled, scuffing his foot on the ground. It was a stupid point, Todoroki, Midoriya said without mercy. Todoroki glared at nothing. Todoroki, were you even paying attention to anything that was going on the day I broke my glass cup? Which time? You've done that many times. Shudo said, eyeing Midoriya's crooked hands. Midoriya sighed. The most recent time. Todoroki squinted his eyes. No? Todoroki, what's your thoughts on the quirkless? Todoroki looked like a vaguely confused cat. I dunno. Can't say I've thought about it much except that I sometimes wished I was quirkless when I was younger, Todoroki said blandly. You should ask my brother Natsuo, he's a whole conspiracy that my idiot father put together. Midoriya shook his head, grinning in an almost awestruck, exasperated way. Well, it's about that, so, no secret love children here, Midoriya clarified. Todoroki cast a dubious look towards Shinso, who was sitting there looking like he was losing brain cells by the second before looking back at Midoriya with a raised eyebrow. About quirklessness? What oh? Todoroki said slowly, blank-faced. Todoroki just stood there for a few seconds. Silently, like he was rebooting. Jiraiya looked half a second away from defenestration. I think I get it now, Todoroki suddenly said. I'm gonna go bother Natsuo later over the phone. He might like this, who knows, Todoroki said with a lazy shrug before gently picking his tray back up and waltzing off. Nito's food fell out of his agape mouth. Excuse my French, but what the F dash? Nito said after clearing his throat. Midoriya just shook his head again with a grin, before setting his tray down around where Todoroki's was previously, finally taking a seat himself. Midoriya, Nito said in a strained, begging voice. I don't what? Shinso mumbled weakly to himself. Jiraiya's face was planted in her hands. She let out a long, pain-filled groan. Nito very much shared the sentiment. To make a long story short, Todoroki has this long-running conspiracy that I am All Might's secret love child, which is false, Midoriya said, almost a little desperately, and he compared that theory with his own experience with his shitty father, which led to the whole showdown fiasco yesterday. If you want any more details, ask Todoroki himself, as it is not my story, but that's the basic gist of it. Midoriya said, grabbing his chopsticks and taking a bite of his food. Shinso looked like he was at a loss for words, staring blankly at nothing with a slight furrow to his brows. He also has a habit of just agreeing with the people around him when he's not really paying attention, so, Midoriya just shrugged. You can imagine how much shenanigans involving miscommunication he gets into. He once accidentally joined a cult because of this, but we don't talk about that, he said cryptically, before taking another bite. So, you basically just let him continue on with his ridiculous plan just so you could use him as an example? Jiraiya asked slowly, saying every word carefully as if she was scared of being misunderstood. Yep, Midoriya said shortly but truthfully. Nito slammed his hand on the table, rattling his tray and everything on it slightly. You know what? Being a dramatic but is my trademark, and I am suing you and Todoroki for copyright infringement. This is unacceptable, and I refuse to just let this tomfoolery slide. Where is the justice? Nito started prattling off to cope with whatever the hell that conversation just was. Shinso just sighed loudly right beside him, seemingly coming back to reality. You know what? I don't even care that much, Shinosu muttered to himself, before he picked up his chopsticks and started digging into his now probably lukewarm meal. Jiraiya just nodded slowly to herself and followed Shinosu's lead, both of them completely ignoring Nito's plight. Midoriya just looked smug, before also committing himself fully to finishing his food. Nito made a pouty face in protest. Hey, Monoma, think about it this way, Jiraiya said after a minute, still keeping her eyes on her food. At least you'll always be the BSD weasel. Nito hates it here. I'm just saying, maybe you should reconsider. No, Toshinori, I've given you a night and almost another full day to think about it. That's more than enough time for something that should not be held off any longer. Naomasa said, pulling on his trench coat and rummaging around his pockets to find his car keys. You could be putting a lot of people in danger, Naomasa. I don't know if you got the memo, All Might, but they're already in danger. The LOV is only going to get stronger despite AFO being arrested, and their grudge against UA likely will never end. Show Yuta knowing will not change that. Naomasa clipped in an annoyed tone, grumbling when he had to check multiple pockets just to finally find his keys. Just let me handle it, please. I know I can. Knowing and doing are two different things. Just by the fact that you called me and tried to convince me otherwise is proof that you'll only shove the entire problem off to the side and hope people eventually forget about it like you always do. Well, I hate to break it to you, But this is not an issue where you can just do that without people getting even more hurt in the long run, specifically Midoriya, Naomasa lectured while he walked out toward his car. This is non-negotiable. In fact, I might try to find Midoriya himself to convince him to pick some good, trustworthy friends to make in the know as well, so the weight of the entire FNG world doesn't crush him like it did you. Naomasa might have let too much bitterness about how careless Toshinori was with his own life, leading to his famous career-ending injury. While he might have opinions about how Toshinori essentially making himself a diet atlas was pretty stupid, there's really not much that could be done about it now, except letting society repair itself over time. With luck, it wouldn't completely collapse. Toshinori made a wounded sound, coughing harshly for a second before going completely silent. Naomasa could almost picture the sad face Toshinori was probably making. "I'm sorry, Toshinori, but this is for the best," Naomasa said in a deflated tone, before hanging up and unlocking his car. Destination UA. Notes. Shameless promo for my arsonist is ZFIC. Light a match, watch it burn. Also, for anyone even remotely interested, I'm working on another FIC that will take place in the MCU called Dream Suite in C major. At its most basic, it'll be about Peter Parker being stuck in a time loop. More info about it can be found on my Discord. Come scream at me on my Discord. The people there are fun and chaotic, while also being really friendly and welcoming. It's a great crowd. Discord. Good morning, and in case I don't see ya, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. Truman. Chapter 15. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Toshinori was, for lack of a better word, quaking in his boots. He could not risk the secret of OFA getting out, even if it were just to another person. While he might respect Aizawa as a hero and fellow teacher teaching the new generations of heroes, this secret was simply too large, too important to risk even on someone as logical as him. Toshinori had Nezu for that, Naomasa for that. He never thought the day would come where his dear friend would betray him like this. Naomasa should know it's not his secret to tell. Naomasa should know how dangerous of a secret it was. How you can't exactly come back from it once you know. He was essentially going to air out a generational secret that not even the commission knew of, and to who? A homeroom teacher that occasionally helped out with heroics lessons? It was too risky. And with these thoughts running circles around his head, Toshinori came to a decision. He'd go to Nezu, explain the situation, and hopefully Naomasa wouldn't be able to step even a single foot on campus. Nezu would understand. He was smart like that. It also didn't help that Nezu had to sign what was the equivalent to an NDA sanctioned by the Hero Commission and his agency when Toshinori first got the job, stating he'd keep all secretive matters relating to All Might as that, a secret. So, legally speaking, he had to understand, right? He'd understand. And so, Toshinori went on a mission. A mission to Principal Nezu's office with a plan at the ready. He'd understand. "I apologize, Yagi, but I simply do not have the time for you right now," Nezu said sharply, typing erratically and quickly on his keyboard. Nearly a full pot of tea sat beside him, hours cold. He didn't have the time for anything except this at the moment. "But Nezu, surely you can spare even a minute of your time? I'd argue this matter is rather important," the buffoon prattled off, looking a little desperate. Nezu didn't even look up. If it's anything less than AFO escaping Tartarus to wreak havoc, the LOV or any other dangerous villains attacking, or a student dying on the ground, then no. "I cannot spare you even a minute of time," Nezu replied curtly, internally screaming at the top of his lungs when the buffoon opened his mouth to speak again. Then, something momentarily surprising happened in the form of Aizawa, of all people, barging into his office much in a similar manner to that of the buffoon. "Neds, you rap-a-beach. You have some explaining to do," Aizawa said darkly, a clear, angry aura surrounding his person. Why did the universe decide now, of all times, was the perfect time for him to be interrupted? Nezu loudly banged once on the table with his paw as a series of codes he was trying to get through started getting jumbled up, the teapot shuddering as a result. "I do not have the time," Nezu said with a raised voice, a growl slipping out to accompany it as he quickly pulled up another back door he noticed earlier, and started digging through that instead. That seemed to do the trick and shut the both of them up quickly. Nedzu was vaguely aware of the shocked expressions they must be wearing, but he didn't have the capacity to care about that at the moment. Blissfully, Aizawa seemed to quickly get the message, swiftly turning around and dragging the stock-still buffoon out with him. This, right here, was why Aizawa was his favorite. With the distractions finally gone, Nedzu cranked up his speed typing tenfold, destroying digital walls faster than they could be put up and repaired. He was not going to let stolen information remain in the files of those who it didn't belong to. He'd destroy it all before it even had the chance to be properly used. You didn't F with Nedzu and to this extent and expect to get away with it scot-free. No way in hell. Time flew by as quickly as Nedzu. He didn't stop for a second, going for as long as his paws would allow. And finally, after what seemed like forever, Nedzu breached their servers and let loose a virus that fed them all up in seconds. He plowed through it all, any file remaining getting metaphorically burned at the stake. He hoped their computers caught fire with how much he was going to overrun their servers with complete sheet. He knew this wasn't foolproof, however. If they had copied the info onto a hard drive or even physically copied it onto paper, he was, quite simply, F'd. He'd have to find some way to either destroy the physical copies or remain on the overwhelming defensive for the foreseeable future. Annoying. How could he let something like this happen? Nedzu found only slight enjoyment in watching them desperately try to save what little was left uncorrupted and undestroyed, it not nearly being as satisfying as it should have been. How could he let something like this happen? Nedzu let out a breath, leaning back in his chair as he took a moment to just breathe. He really did hate the hero commission with a burning passion that rivaled that of the largest red giants. He wished he could just destroy them already. But no, that would leave everything in a terrible disarray. There was nothing and no one to replace them fast enough, especially not with the LOV and other unsavory groups still running around. The long game was best, even if it felt worst. Unfortunate, but true. After letting out a long sigh, Nedzu leaned back forward, pulling up the security cameras placed just outside his office. Unsurprisingly, Aizawa and the buffoon were still there, waiting. Surprisingly, the good detective Tsukachi Naomasa had joined their ranks, seemingly ignoring the buffoon's existence, and instead was sharing awkward glances with Aizawa. Not for the first time, Nedzu wished the day could just end when he wanted it to and without anything to worry about. Unfortunately, that wasn't reality. Unfortunately, he still had things he needed to address and deal with. And so, Nedzu clicked a button under his desk and reopened the doors to his office. Time to face the music. When Naomasa first stepped foot past the UA gates, he knew instantly something was off. The first red flag was the fact Nedzu didn't greet him over the comms at the front like he usually did the good detective pass, silently letting him through and on his way. The second red flag was the fact he didn't see Toshinori anywhere. He was positive Toshinori would try and stop him every step of the way, so the fact he remained nowhere to be seen was suspicious. The third and final red flag was finding Toshinori and Shoyuta squatting outside Nedzu's office, both looking more than a little unsettled and disgruntled all at the same time. Weird. What's going on here? Naomasa asked cautiously, doing the trick at bringing attention to himself. Toshinori's eyes blew wide as he jumped up to a stand. Aizawa, need to leave, Toshinori said quickly, glancing back and forth between the annoyed expressions on Shuta's and Naomasa's face. I called Naomasa here to discuss something important. It's a private matter. But, All Might, you know full well that's a blatant lie, Naomasa said, cutting that excuse into tiny little pieces before it even had the chance to work. And what's going on here? Shoyuta shot blandly, his voice as dry as a dessert. I need to talk with you, Shoyuta, about Midoriya and his quirk, Naomasa said, not beating around the bush. Toshinori looked panicked. Shuta's eyes widened slightly as he raised an eyebrow. What a coincidence. That's actually what I wanted to yell at Nedzu about, Shoyuta admitted darkly. True. Well then. So you already know about his quirk? Naomasa asked to clarify. Shoyuta gave him a weird look, glaring quickly at Toshinori when he weakly tried to interject. I know he was quirkless right up until the entrance exam, or at least I do now, Shoyuta said, bitterness leaking out of his words. Is that what this is about? Not quite, Naomasa said, but partially. Naomasa earned himself another weird look. Shoyuta looked back over at Toshinori, seemingly assessing his almost defeated expression, before glancing back at Naomasa. If this conversation requires Nedzu, then you're out of luck. He's busy right now, Shoyuta informed, lazily gesturing with his head to the closed door. Judging by how ruffled he was, UA is likely having a security issue, so I suggest we wait until he's done with that so we have a definitive secure place where we can all have a nice long chat, Shoyuta said in a sort of drawl. On the surface it was a suggestion, but in reality it was closer to an order. Naomasa sighed, squatting down by Shoyuta. Sounds like a plan, Naomasa said quietly, glancing up at Toshinori who was still standing awkwardly. Toshinori averted his gaze, going back to lean on the wall instead of sitting back on the ground. And so that's what they all did. They sat there in complete and utter silence. Awkward silence. Fun times. All around. At some point, Naomasa had brought his phone out to mindlessly scroll through, before eventually giving up on that, going back to just sitting there doing nothing. Sometimes he'd glance at Shoyuta, Shoyuta would glance back, and then they'd both glance away again. Fun times. After what felt like an eternity and a half, the door to Nedzu's office finally opened, startling Toshinori slightly. Naomasa felt bad about bothering Nedzu after what was probably just a stressful digital tower defense, but Toshinori was proving himself to be difficult about this matter, so it was better to get it done now than later. Plus, there was the whole Shoyuta wanting to scream at Nedzu thing, and he can't really do much about that, so. Hello Yagi, Tsukachi, Aizawa, what is it you wanted to discuss? Nedzu asked, his voice coming out slightly flatter than usual. Understandable. Honestly, is the security of UA safe right now? Aizawa asked, beating Naomasa to the punch. Nedzu took in a breath. The short answer is yes. Fortunately. The long answer, however, is the Hero Commission now has a bunch of student info that I have destroyed digitally, but has also possibly been copied physically. And yes, I know what you're going to say, Yagi, but they don't care that this is illegal, Nedzu said, slightly exasperated. They couldn't get any further than that, fortunately, but that's still a major break, and puts me in a predicament where my desire to burn their facilities has grown exponentially. And no, Yagi, the police nor the government will do anything about it in the stage that I am currently at. Truth. Are there any concerns about the students' safety because of this, and will we be able to handle whatever comes? Aizawa asked, once again beating out Naomasa. Nedzu smiled a bit, thinking about it for a moment. I am confident we can keep everyone safe and handle this going forward. I just might have to speed things up a bit, Nedzu said confidently. Truth. Naomasa let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. Out of the corner of his eye, he could see Shoyuta relax slightly as well. Good. Now I can ask about why the F you didn't tell me Midoriya's quirk didn't come in until around the time of the FING entrance exams. Shoyuta exclaimed, his voice tight. Ah, yes, that, Nedzu said, turning towards Naomasa, who had unconsciously raised his hand. Naomasa straightened slightly when everyone in the room turned to him, Shoyuta looking more than a little annoyed at what probably looked like a deflect. Was it because of One for All? Naomasa asked. Nedzu shook his head, no, while Shoyuta just looked confused. Toshinori took a step forward suddenly, throwing a hand out to the side. Nedzu, you can't seriously, you signed, Toshinori started, before getting cut off. I didn't say anything, Yagi. The good detective did, Nedzu said, if a bit smugly, and regarding that, no. I could have just said he was a late bloomer as a warning, and left it at that, Nedzu admitted. True. Disregarding whatever the hell this One for All is, Shoyuta cut in, why didn't you just do that? To explain that properly, I first need Tsukachi here to state his piece, Nedzu explained, still not looking away from Naomasa. If you could. Naomasa could see Toshinori looking at him from the corner of his eye. One last desperate call to keep quiet. A warning. Naomasa took a deep breath and let it out sharply. Eyes hard and conviction strong. All Might gave Midoriya his quirk, which is called One for All or OFA. It's a generational quirk originating from All for One that has had 7 holders before All Might, making Midoriya the 9th. It gets stronger with each holder, stockpiling their power to be used, even after death, all to fight and hopefully defeat All for One. That's why Midoriya's quirk came in so late. He never had one. He was given it the day of the exam and was set to be trained by All Might to be the next symbol of peace. His successor, Naomasa, spewed out, trying not to leave any important details out in one big info dump. After he was done, Naomasa looked over at Shoyuta. To say he was fuming would be an understatement. And why did nobody tell me this? Shoyuta repeated for what had to have been the 100th time. Midoriya has broken so many bones, I've lost count. If I'd have known. Would that really have changed anything though? I can imagine quite vividly a scenario where you would have fought even harder for Midoriya's expulsion because of this. You wouldn't have even given him a chance, and when I would have overruled your decision for the first time, you would have gone digging for an answer I couldn't actually give without All Might and the commission getting on my back. Why do you think I asked Tsukachi to explain it, and not me? Netsu questioned sharply, and even if I dragged the good detective here to explain it all, the scenario remains the same because everyone thought All for One dead and gone. That just leaves a quirkless child no one knows or understands fully yet who has been given a power that can destroy mountains, cities. The only thing I had to go on was the good word of All Might that this child was not going to become a full-fledged megalomaniac. I can see now that's not that case, but only because I left him be. Of course, when he only continued to break bones, and you continued to not help him despite that, I called up Gran Torino to do what apparently All Might could not. Teach him something. Netsu ranted, before freezing still. The room went completely silent. For a moment, one could hear a pin slice the very air if one were to drop. And when it hit the ground. Pandemonium. You motherfucker, if I'd have known I wouldn't have thought Midoriya was just some brat with an unstable, powerful quirk and actually done something. And why should that have mattered? I didn't think it did. I thought, I don't care. I'm still set off, you know how I work, how I think, you should have known. Aizawa, Netsu, let's just calm down, All Might tried, before getting two very angry sets of eyes on him, one glowing red, the other a beady void. And you? They both growled in tandem, Netsu crawling onto his desk to be at a stand, and Shoyuta taking a very menacing step forward. Yagi, if you hadn't abused your title and gotten the commission to get you a job here. If you had just asked for help, deflated your ego and admitted you were way out of your depth. If you hadn't had the audacity to make me sign that pointless non-disclosure. If you had done your FNG job. Done what you were supposed to. Actually taught your own goddamn successor. Figured out your priorities. We wouldn't be in this mess. Netsu and Shoyuta panted harshly from all the yelling on their end, Toshinori looking like a thoroughly scolded child, and probably more than a little fearful of his life. Enough was enough. This was getting ridiculous. Naomasa clenched his hand and loudly cleared his throat. All of you, calm the F down, Naomasa said, voice loud and clear. And only when all eyes were on him and him alone, did Naomasa spoke again, leaving no room for interjection. Tell me, who does this help? Nobody, he said harshly. Yes, Toshinori should have told Shoyuta instead of trying to do everything on his own. Yes, Netsu should have told Shoyuta when he inevitably realized Toshinori wouldn't. Yes, maybe you, Shoyuta, should have looked into it sooner. Maybe I, one of All Might's closest friends, should have known not to trust him with this, Naomasa recapped, unconsciously starting to pace. While all this might be true and is important, and are invariably FUs, all I'm hearing is should've, would've, could've, Naomasa said, shaking his head. What I want to know, right now, is what you all are going to do about it. What are you going to do with this information now that it's all out in the open? Naomasa asked, gesturing widely. I came here today to bring Shoyuta into the loop because I knew he would be helpful. Yes, it should have happened sooner, but it didn't, so I did it now while I still had the chance to even do something about it, Naomasa revealed, before coming to a stop. What you do with this information and how it will help Midoriya is what's important. It's not a FING contest to figure out who F'd up the most here, pointing your finger and saying aha. It was you. Won't actually help Midoriya in any way. Naomasa took a deep breath and properly took in the other three occupants of the room. They still looked angry, rightfully so, but not as recklessly. Not as pointlessly. So, what I want to know is this. Naomasa states pointedly, staring them all down. What are you going to do about it? Notes. Man, sorry for the long wait, but with trying to figure out Dream Suite in C major, I kinda lost track of my other fix for a bit, but hopefully I'm back in the groove. Fingers crossed, knock on wood, etc. etc. That being said, it's about to be getting wild here in the Strike universe, folks. Hope you're excited. Shameless promo for my arsonist is ZFIC. Light a match, watch it burn. Good morning, and in case I don't see ya, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. Truman. Chapter 16. Notes. Warning. Talks of suicide bullying. See the end of the chapter for more notes. For as long as Izuku could remember, he'd been angry. It was never something obvious, though, nor was it something discreet. It's just always been. Always there, just under the surface, simmering at a constant, steady rate. But the quirkless don't get to be angry. The quirkless aren't even supposed to exist anymore, so any amount of ungratefulness expressed was basically treason, sacrilege of the highest degree. When he was younger, he'd get angry at his classmates for the cruel things they'd say that hurt. They caused him. He'd get angry for the cases who had it so much worse, wondering why does it have to be this way? He'd get angry at himself for being too weak, for being too much of a Deku to be able to do anything about it. And what would happen? It would get worse. At some point, being angry just wasn't worth it anymore. Sometimes, he'd daydream about running away, running so far he'd reached one of those out-of-the-way countryside towns in England or Alaska that still had large amounts of the quirkless population, where it didn't matter so much, where it didn't matter at all, and all he had to worry about was a farm, or a simple job, or whatever. Anything that wasn't treating injuries, or replacing destroyed belongings, or desperately tending to the fire that was his dream. But then he'd get angry again. He'd get so angry, he'd feel like the feeling alone would kill him from the inside out. That's when his feelings of anger boiled into something that looked a lot more like hatred. But, as said before, showing it only made everything worse. So, he just didn't. He learned how best to act, how best to deal with the cards he'd been dealt. And that was fine. It worked, so who actually cared if he hated what he was becoming? The perfect doormat used to wipe the bottom of other people's shoes? Izuku did, obviously, but one thing always kept him from slipping, one thing that outweighed even the almost guaranteed promise of worse pain to come. He saw what hatred did to people, what it did to his best friend, and Izuku feared it. For as angry as Izuku was, he was filled with just as much fear. Fear of the world, fear of others, and fear of himself. He didn't want to be like that, like someone hateful and angry who hurt others for reasons as simple as just because. He wanted to be a hero. A hero who saved the day and made everyone feel safe. A hero who smiled in the face of danger, of adversity, and won. But as nice as that desire was, it was based on something juvenile. A rose filter that shattered the first time he met All Might. And unfortunately, emotions are hardly something so simple. They can be, certainly, but are often much more complicated. But, for the longest time, Izuku was scared of these emotions. And so, he used his fear to control them and in turn let it control him. The anger never did leave, though as said, it's always been there. Just suppressed and buried, only obviously resurfacing occasionally, and only in the face of great danger that promised to hurt others. And his hatred? Well, he left that to rot under everything else. Salted it. Buried it. And that was fine. It worked. So who actually cared? Who actually cared? Then Izuku got a quirk, got into UA, and made some friends. People who cared about him. It was foreign and felt almost wrong. He felt like he was constantly walking on eggshells whenever he spoke to them. Like if he made one wrong move, one wrong comment, one wrong opinion, and his friends would hate him, turn on him, betray him like everyone always did, hurt him like Kaken did. It got easier over time, like exposure tends to do. He became less afraid and more bold, but he never truly did stop thinking in the back of his mind where the catch to all of it was. And when he did, eventually find it, well, he wasn't lying when he said he hadn't felt that angry in a while. Because he wasn't angry. He was furious. It was like everything he was ever scared of was rendered null after the very first comment about Eri Ito and her quirklessness. For every callous thing said from his friends' people he would lay down his life for in an instant. It was like an adrenaline shot of wrath injected directly into his veins. Funny things can happen to people when their fears are realized. For Izuku, it was when the people he cared about the most said without remorse that, essentially, they would rather he were dead, gone. Take a swan dive off the roof. Sure, they didn't know his history, but somehow that just made it so much worse. They didn't deserve it. They didn't deserve to know how much they hurt him until he knew for sure that they would understand it completely. He needed them to understand exactly where they went wrong before they got the privilege to know how much they hurt him. So the realization would only hurt all the more. And so, after crushing his glass cup with his bare hands, instead of saying everything he wanted to, he walked away. And, quickly, he hated himself for how vindictive of a desire that was. Thinking that, instead, he should just go back down there and explain in excruciating detail everything he wanted to say. But he was tired of hoping for the best and getting the worst. He didn't have the energy to indulge these kinds of things anymore. He didn't have the energy to indulge people who didn't give a single shit about him because of something so inconsequential anymore. It was time everyone else started putting in the effort he put in for so long. He can easily forgive ignorance, ingrained prejudice, and whatever else, as long as he wasn't the one begging for people to understand that he didn't deserve to be told he wasn't even human anymore. He would give them the tools, the knowledge, and the proof, and leave it at that. It was up to them to decide if their empathy and tolerance extended past their prejudice. It just wasn't worth it to give more than that. He can lead a horse to water, but he cannot make it drink. And he was tired of trying. Do you forgive Bakugo? Izuku startled, causing his pen to JRK and mess up the word he'd been writing in his notebook before looking up towards Hitoshi, who was currently watching Dark Shadow go apeshit on some cement columns while Samenta-sensei and Midnight-sensei stood by as adult supervision. On the other side of the honestly obnoxiously sized gym, Kaminari let out a distant scream at getting ganged up on by Jairu and Minoma. For what? Izuku asked lightly. Because, while he had ideas about what Hitoshi could mean, he wasn't about making assumptions. For the way he's treated you, Hitoshi clarified, before taking his eyes off of Dark Shadow and looking back at Izuku to meet his eyes. I'm not blind, your supposedly childhood friends, or so I've been told, Hitoshi grumbled, expression darkening, but he's never really acted friendly with you in any way before recently. Which was true. Katsuki's sudden attitude shift, while welcome, was still honestly kind of surprising for Izuku. Some part of him was almost angry about it, how simple it had been in the grand scheme. Despite that though, Izuku still hadn't gotten what he really wanted from him yet. The answer was simple. No. I don't. Hitoshi, seemingly satisfied with his answer, nodded softly. Some strain in his posture Izuku hadn't really noticed until now loosened considerably. Why? Izuku asked curiously, docking his head slightly to the side. Hitoshi sighed. Honestly, I was a little worried that you had. I know it's not really my place, but even from just what I've seen, I don't think he deserves it, even if. Hitoshi cut himself off and looked away for a moment, suddenly looking nervous and slightly frustrated. Izuku gave him a soft, assuring look. What if he apologized? Right now? Hitoshi eventually mumbled. Honestly, Izuku was instantly ready to say, yes, of course I would forgive him, but he inexplicably stopped himself right before he could, leaving his mouth awkwardly open for a second, before he closed it. It was exactly what he was looking for, an apology. Something quite simple, and probably even something that would be sincere with how Katsuki was acting recently. So, something stopped him. Dark Shadow let out a particularly loud crow, making Izuku unconsciously look up towards the bird duo. They looked like they hadn't had that much fun, nor felt that much relief in ages. Izuku's mouth felt dry. I don't know. The turmoil he felt must have shown on his face, because Hitoshi looked at him with obvious concern glinting in his eyes. He thought he did. It was something he had been ready to do since the first time Katsuki called him Deku with contempt. But, now that it was a genuine possibility, he just didn't think he could. almost like those particular feelings of goodwill had passed their expiration date, and the thought of even tasting the words, "I forgive you," Kaken, filled him with dread. It was annoying. Well, personally, I don't think forgiveness should be something you feel obligated to give, Hitoshi said bluntly, smirking a bit. It's up to the individual, right? And oh yeah, Izuku had said something similar to Kaminari, hadn't he? Touché, Izuku said with good humor and a matching smirk, before looking away again, but still. I've been so sure that I would, Izuku says, voice catching. Take a swan. He didn't mean it, I'm sure, Izuku said, more so to himself than anything, dropping his voice down to a near whisper as he continued, so what does it matter? Do you want to talk about it? Hitoshi asked a bit awkwardly, but still sincerely. Izuku noted Hitoshi had shuffled closer to him without him realizing. Izuku huffed quietly, snapping his notebook shut, before tucking it under his arm. Unconsciously, he leaned more into Hitoshi's personal space. Bakugu was a lot worse before you, Izuku said simply, a lot worse. He kept his eyes glued to the ground. I think being around actual competition helped put things into perspective for him, changed him. Would you believe me if I said that he's actually been unusually mellow? Izuku laughed, though it sounded a little too hollow for his taste. He cleared his throat. I never did figure out why he hated me so much, though. The simple answer would be my quirklessness, but, Izuku furrowed his eyebrows, but it always felt more personal than that. I'd ask, sometimes, but he was never able to give me an answer, Izuku said, voice darkening without his consent. I don't even think he remembered why himself. Izuku stayed silent for a long moment after that, listening to the ambient, distant sounds of sparring between friends and gleeful destruction that set free pent-up emotions. When Izuku eventually looked back up to Hitoshi, whose expression showed calm, but had eyes that were wild with something Izuku couldn't identify, he felt like he was crying with no tears to show for it. It was enough to finally unclog his throat. Is it wrong that I hate him more for that than him telling me to jump off a roof and pray for a quirk in my next life? Izuku then laughed quietly, his voice breaking and hitching. Distantly he registered Hitoshi freezing still. His eyes stung. I want to forgive him so bad because I don't want to hate him. But I feel like I'd just hate him more if I did right now. Is that a bad thing? Izuku asked, a bit hysterically. Sometimes I hate him so much it hurts, sometimes I get so angry I want him to hurt just as bad as he hurt me, and worse, sometimes I want to kill him where he stands, Izuku warbled harshly with a ducked head as his shoulders shook slightly from tears that refused to fall. But I don't want that because he's my best friend, and only villains think like that. Suddenly, he felt arms around him pulling him into a strong, warm hug. It's okay, Hitoshi said softly, squeezing him a bit tighter. It's okay. I could do it easily, you know. Izuku continued weakly as tears started to build up in his face. I could probably write an entire book series about the ways I could permanently take him out of commission. That's pretty effing deranged, disgusting, villainous. You shut up, Hitoshi hisses softly, voice dripping with emotion. You don't get to talk that way about someone I care about. But, no. You, Hitoshi interjected, because if that's true, then I'm more villainous than you. Shin. No, you shut the F up and listen. Hitoshi suddenly pulls away slightly, making Izuku look him right in the eye. Izuku's reddened eyes widened when he realized Hitoshi was also holding back his own tears, face twisted up in sadness, anger, desperation, and other emotions Izuku couldn't identify. You know how many times I wanted to command one of my bullies to jump off the nearest cliff? To strangle themselves? To cause harm on themselves instead of on me? Hitoshi rushed out, squeezing Izuku's shoulders tighter. It'd be easy for me. Simple even. Hitoshi's eyes glinted, looking almost like they were glowing with intensity. Does that make me a disgusting, villainous piece of shit? The tears finally fell after that. The answer was simple. No. Of course not, Izuku said softly. Defeatedly. He felt his shoulders go limp and heavy, making it feel like Hitoshi was the only one keeping him up. He probably was. Oh, there you have it. Hitoshi huffed, pulling Izuku back into his chest. Izuku didn't think he'd ever felt more safe than he did in that movement. Distantly, he's reminded of the last time this happened when Hitoshi had nonchalantly and bluntly said a quirkless person could become a hero. This felt like a reminder of that it was still true, but somehow it also felt like so much more. Slowly, Izuku wrapped his own arms around Hitoshi, holding on tight and sure. "It's okay," Hitoshi whispered. It was okay. Not for the first time, Izuku let his tears flow. Is it wrong that I hate him more for that than him telling me to jump off a roof and pray for a quirk in my next life? Kyuka's eyes widened to the size of saucers, before she stumbled harshly right in the middle of dodging a punch sent towards her by Monoma. And so, instead of gracefully swerving out of the way of the blow, she instead tripped forwards, and took both herself and Monoma out in a kamikaze combo. Well shit. Oh. What the F? Monoma squawked, flailing about like a chicken in an attempt to untangle himself from Kyuka. You guys alright? Kaminari called out, jogging up to both of them with a look of concern. Want to forgive him so bad because I don't want to hate him. But I just hate him more right now. Is that bad thing? Kyuka growled out, futilely slapping her hands over her ears to stop focusing on a conversation she was not supposed to be hearing. Jiru? Hey, calm down, what? Suddenly, Kyuka jumped to her feet while swiftly pulling Monoma up with her. She then proceeded to grab Monoma's shoulders and shake the sheet out of him. Keep talking. Whatever you do what you do best and do not stop talking, Kyuka rushed out quickly begging. Hey, I resent that I'm good at other things, Monoma remarked on autopilot, before developing a concerned expression of his own. But, wait, is it a villain attack? Will I die if I don't? Wait, what? A villain? Tech? Where? Kaminari squeaked. Suddenly, both blondes started panicking, looking around desperately for an assailant that wasn't there. No, there's no villains, Kyuka reassured quickly, suddenly realizing they'd all unknowingly moved their sparring spot closer to. Kyuka caught a glimpse of Midoriya and Shinso, and it finally registered in her head who and where this conversation was coming from. Without thinking, she grabbed both Kaminari's and Monoma's wrists, before dragging them back towards where they all originally were, and then some being careful to stay out of Tokoyami and Dark Shadow's line of fire. Through it all, both blondes babbled incessantly, alternating between freaking the F out and trying to figure out what in the fresh F was going on. Kyuka was too desperate to care about their plight at the moment. Luckily, this did the trick, as combined with the crazy constant screeching from Dark Shadow and the double demands for an explanation, Kyuka was able to successfully drown out whatever conversation Midoriya and Shinso were having by themselves. Midnight Sensei glanced over in their direction, raising a perfect eyebrow. Jiru tiredly waved her off, trying to make it look as reassuring and casual as possible, while both Kaminari and Monoma complained loudly with varying stages of annoyance and apprehension. Midnight Sensei looked unconvinced, squinting her eyes in suspicion, but something must have shown on Kyuka's face, because Midnight Sensei just sighed and looked back towards Tokoyami and Dark Shadow with a shake of her head. Okay, seriously Jiru, what the hell is going on? Yeah man, you're kind of freaking me out here. Taking a page from Midnight Sensei's book, Kyuka sighed, before turning back towards the two blondes, giving them a vaguely apologetic look. Sorry. I didn't mean to scare either of you, it's just, Kyuka glanced over at Midoriya and Shinso again, before quickly averting her gaze. Alright, what's going on here? Monoma asked with a raised brow, crossing his arms, 'cause you looked pretty spooked back there. So unless you saw Casper the friendly ghost committing atrocities so terrible it would cause you to combust if you described them, you'd better tell us what's up. Dude, what? Kaminari asked Monoma incredulously. Monoma ignored him. Kyuka gave Monoma an odd look before bringing a hand up to rub at her eyes. It was nothing, well, not nothing, Kyuka explained disjointedly, Kyuka looked up at both Kaminari and Monoma. They both looked concerned in their own ways. I overheard something I shouldn't have. Unfortunately, her line of sight gave her away when she unconsciously looked towards Midoriya and Shinso again. She couldn't stop the blondes from following it fast enough. Monoma squinted, are Midoriya and Shinso hugging right now? Monoma smirked sharply, fucking saps. Wait, are they dating or something? Kaminari asked before smiling a much less evil and more happy-looking smile. Ah, that's adorable. Trust me, I'm like 68% sure they aren't, but if they just confessed, I'm so ready to tease the sheet out of them, Monoma said impishly before getting cut off. No, that was definitely not the conversation they were having, Kyuka said, shooting that line of thought down before it could grow. What I heard was it was dark. Kyuka refused to give more than that. In fact, let's all endeavor to not disturb them in any way unless they come to us for the time being. What I heard was not good, Kyuka explained, rubbing her arm as she recalled what Midoriya had said. I shouldn't have heard any of it at all. Both blondes' smiles completely fell by the time she was done explaining. It was clear they wanted to know more, understand what was clearly bothering Kyuka, and by extension Midoriya and Shinso, but they both also exhibited an air of understanding. It simply wasn't their business. If either of their friends came to them, they would be there, but as it stood, they wouldn't poke this sleeping dog unless they had a very good reason to. Kyuka, currently, was simultaneously trying to hold in her rage at what she'd heard, and also trying to eject it from her memory like she hadn't heard the pain in Midoriya's voice as he spoke those words. Silently, she vowed to KO whoever said that to Midoriya at least once if she ever got the chance. Even if she hadn't meant to discover such a thing, she'd be dead if she let the one responsible remain unpunished if she had any say. She hoped her expression explained that desire well to the two in front of her. The firm nods they both gave told her that it had. Huffing, Monoma relaxed his posture, bringing his hands to rest behind his head. Let's get back to sparring. I still gotta work on my throws. On my ain, but your throws Huyuert. Essekus to SCK, plebeian. Notes. I hope at least some of you cried reading this, because DM'n, I got close a couple times. In other news, I kinda just gave up on overthinking this chapter and shat it out in a couple hours after months of writer's block, so, sorry if it at all seems kinda weirdly paced, littered with a couple typos, or whatever else. Also, in other news, I've been thinking of starting another BNH FIC. I know. How irresponsible of me. So, look out for that, I guess? Anyway, hope you like this chapter. Shameless promo for my arsonist is FIC. Light a match, watch it burn. Shameless promo for my Peter Parker-centric time loop FIC, Eldritch Horror Survivalist Edition. Dream Suite in C Major. Shameless promo for my friend's Supernatural FIC. Go show it some love because it deserves it. Keep your fears close, the shadows are always watching. Good morning, and in case I don't see ya, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. Truman. Chapter 17, Curiosity Killed the Cat. Notes. Warning, graphic depiction of bullying violence, as well as cruel verbal harassment. See the end of the chapter for more notes. Bro, what the F are you doing, you effing dumbass? Fall back, go back F. Bitch, what the F? No, come on man, come on. Your life is mine, you Sonova Beach. Shoot his butt down, what are you F doing? Men. Hanta hissed quietly through his mic, a loud, frustrated growl nearly ripping itself from his throat before he forcefully calmed himself down, not wanting to possibly disturb any of his classmates at what was definitely but o'clock at night. Setting his controller down beside his computer for a moment, Hanta rubbed at his forehead, marginally soothing the headache that had been slowly building since the beginning of the round. The group he'd landed himself with wasn't bad, but not his favorite by any stretch, as the online friends he usually played with were likely off either sleeping or doing whatever else. Not that he could fault them for it, he's normally asleep around this time as well. Hanta contemplated leaving the server and finding another when one of the other guys that had died before him, X-Sex Cybercypher Sex, spoke up in the dead guy lobby. You lasted a lot longer than I thought you would. That guy's insane when playing the monster role. Cyber said in a resigned sort of way that Hanta's sure spoke of hours spent dealing with the guy. Hanta exhaled a little tired laugh, unconsciously loosening up as he internally acquiesced. Yeah, it's getting kind of annoying though. I swear he's coming after me specifically. And that had to be true, as mundane username 69 had the uncanny ability to always get Hanta very early on in the game whenever he ended up being the designated monster of the round. Nah, I think you're just unlucky. I've played with that guy before, he doesn't hold a grudge unless you persistently F him over. Cyber assured, confirming Hanta's earlier assessment. I'll take your word for it, Hanta accepted easily, sighing again. And for the next 5 to 10 minutes they watched on as the rest of the players fruitlessly ran around like headless chickens trying to avoid getting curb stomped by mundane username 69. They clearly weren't doing a very good job, as in no time, 2 more players, lactose intolerant and scapegoat 42, joined their ranks in the dead guy lobby. How does he keep doing that? Lactose bemoaned. Guy has to be cheating, I swear on my FNG quirk he has some sort of player locator or something, Goat complained, sounding 1 decibel away from whining the somewhat poor audio grating static along the edges of his words. Heh, I wouldn't do that, man. This is not a time you'd want to be quirkless, I can tell you that, Cyber piped up. And yeah, Hanta agreed wholeheartedly as he thinks back to a specific challenge he'd heard about. His mouth goes a little dry at the thought. He just knew he'd never be able to handle being so defenseless, hopeless. The thought scared him more than he'd care to admit. Well, it's a good thing that I wouldn't lose my quirk then, because he has to be cheating. I'll ring up that quirk-stealing guy from Kamino then, 'cause I know mundane's not, I assure you. Hanta felt the breath forcefully leave his lungs at the unexpected mention of the monster of a villain from Kamino. He felt a violent shiver crawl down his spine. You is hype man or some sheet? Goat accused, his mic crackling a bit. No, but I know what cheats look like, and I know when someone just fings. Cyber sniped almost boredly and without delay. You take that back, I know that guy's cheating, I know. Oh, what's that I hear? The Kamino boogeyman knocking on your mother's basement door? Cyber taunted. If you don't shut the F up, I'll be the one who busts that quirk-stealing F out Tartarus to snatch your quirk, you beach butt. Can you guys just stop talking about him? Please? Hanta suddenly begged over the mic without really meaning to, hoping the obvious crack in his voice was just mistaken as bad mic quality to the others. What, were you there or something? Goat asked sarcastically. The dead guy lobby went dead silent as the guy waited for any response, the only sounds being the slightly muffled gameplay still going on in the background. Unfortunately, Hanta quickly found that his throat was too closed up to give a proper one. The silence seems to answer enough. Oh, sorry. No, I wasn't there. But I was involved, sorta. I don't know if I can really talk about it. Hanta finally said, suddenly regaining control of his voice, unsure if he was even allowed to give much info about it to randos on the internet. No one had strictly said anything about not being able to, but Hanta still didn't really want to regardless. Why can't you? Oh shit, are you a UA hero student? Were you at the training camp where? Lactose suddenly chimed in, sounding rather eager. Yeah, I know Hanta accidentally stumbled over his words, mentally kicking the shit out of himself as he tried regaining control of the situation. He knew he should have just gone to bed earlier. Holy shit. What was it like? You know, having to fight all those villains? Was it cool? Guys, we shouldn't be asking about that, Cyber cuts in. Ciro's distantly grateful for the attempt. Oh come on, you gotta be curious too. Yeah, and he's been training for shit like that, I'm sure it's fine. I don't want to talk about it. Hanta said sharply. The lobby went silent again. Hanta held his breath. He should really just leave. Okay, so no villain stuff. Got it. So, what about classes, what are they like? A new guy's voice, middle finger XL, comes through in the dead guy lobby, cutting off everyone else with his wails of despair. So anyway, as I was asking, Hanta sighs harshly, annoyance leaking into his voice and smoothly replacing his earlier panic. Classes are fine, pretty hard sometimes, but that's expected, Hanta explains curtly, trying to get it over with as fast as possible. What are we asking? XL pipes up. Flextape's a UA hero student. Wait, what? Seriously? Yeah. Woden in small world. XL laughs, his voice suddenly taking on a conspiring edge. Hey, you know, back in junior high, I knew a couple guys that are now in the hero course. Really? Who were they? Maybe I know them, Hanta said, a bit shocked, and suddenly feeling a lot more awake. Small world indeed. But Kogu the explodey guy, which wasn't really much of a surprise for the lot of us. We all knew he had a really good chance at getting in, the guy said flippantly, like there truly wasn't any doubt that he would've. And yes, Zero understands the sentiment. Deku on the other hand still don't know who let that worthless F in, XL said crassly and contemptuously, obviously still completely baffled about it. For the second time that night Hanta felt his breath knocked out of his lungs. Worthless? Midoriya? The two things just didn't go with each other on a fundamental level. Like water and oil. Quirked and not quirked. Hanta could feel his brain short-circuiting at the mere attempt at connecting the two ideas, feeling like he finally understood, if only just a little bit, of what Kaminari must go through when he short-circuits. Whoa, bro, where the F did that come from? Cyber exclaimed with a "you'd better back the F down" edge that was clearly sharpening. Yeah. None of you can say shit you didn't know him like I did. He'd jump at the slightest sound. I swear to God it was downright pathetic, XL spat out defensively and definitively. Hanta finally felt anger start bubbling up, making his hands shake with an intensity that nearly cracked his controller. But still maddeningly no words fell from his mouth. Bro. And he's quirkless. I know this because he's been quirkless since FING kindergarten. I honestly don't know how he's been faking that crazy strength quirk or whatever the F it is for as long as he has, but I genuinely have no FNG idea how he hasn't been caught yet. The lobby, once again, went completely silent. Hanta tried to find words, any words to say or even think. But he couldn't. He wanted to speak out, defend his classmate against such awful, horrible words and accusations. But he couldn't. It felt like his brain had frozen completely over. That's bullshit. 7,000 plus languages and you're speaking bullshit. I don't believe you. He's angry with us, Goat declared, now clearly writing XL off as someone unworthy of any merit. Pretty soon this guy's gonna be calling his daddy who owns this game to ban our buttes, or something stupid, like a FNG loser, Cyber tacked on with heat. Hey, and then everyone clapped. If you don't believe me, there's old videos of him on some of my friends' social media accounts. I'll even give you the link and invite. It's at Sharktooth, XL stated, typing in what he promised into the lobby chat. And how, pray tell, would FNG videos prove whether this guy was quirkless or not? Cyber asked dryly, but it was clear by the sudden quiet that everyone had, in fact, investigated the link. Cyber went quiet too. Hanta's not sure if that meant he'd gone to look as well. Hanta's not sure if he, himself, won't, as he unconsciously found his mouse hovering over the link. To look or not to look? Hanta thinks he can hear his very blood rushing through his veins with how intensely his heart is beating against his ribs like a gong. In the time of silence, a few more people die expressing their complaints into the chat before clearly rage quitting, possibly being put off by the deafening silence of the dead guy lobby. What feels like an eternity passes by where Hanta just stares at his computer screen, feeling like not a single thought passes through his mind, while simultaneously feeling like millions are filling it to bursting with pure static. Then someone spoke. You know, he's probably like a late bloomer or something, Goat said, somehow sounding both hesitant and assured. Like he'd been unsettled greatly, but still had things he wanted to say. At like 15? Fat chance, XL said dismissively. Then, maybe he lied about being quirkless. People lie about shit all the time, Goat offered, though something about his tone told Hanta he didn't quite believe his own words. Lie? Yeah. About being quirkless? That's like committing suicide. Not even the weirdos who fake illnesses and shit claim the quirkless card, Lactose said scathingly. I'd say these videos just further prove why that is. This doesn't make any sense. What? Hey Flex Tape, you know him? What do you think? XL asked so pointedly, Hanta could almost see the finger being pointed in his general direction at the words. Hanta swallowed. Hanta buried his face into both his hands, jostling his headset and mic, and just thought for a moment. He took a deep, nearly shuddering breath. Well, I know he has a quirk, Hanta almost whispered with a weight that declared it's the truth beyond any doubt. And he does know because he's seen the sparks, the overwhelming power, and it stops working whenever Aizawa-sensei uses his quirk on Midoriya. Any possible cheat wouldn't do that, Hanta knows. This seems to catch XL off guard. You're positive? XL asked, bordering on accusing. Yes. I have ways of knowing ways I know I can't explain to you, Hanta said strongly, finally finding a way to make them all back off, as Aizawa-sensei's quirk was something he knew he couldn't openly talk about outside of school. It's classified. You understand. Then, Hanta does something he should have done a while ago. Look, I'm gonna call it a night. It's late and I've got school stuff tomorrow, Hanta said disjointedly, sounding beyond uncomfortable even to his own ears. After his declaration, everyone quietly mumbles out barely discernible goodbyes, still clearly marinating in confusion and probably shock. Who really FING knows? Hanta can't bring himself to care. Hey, have a good night and good luck, Cyber finally spoke after his long bout of silence. Hanta doesn't understand what he meant. And Hanta doesn't waste any more time clicking off the game after that. But not before saving the link. In the back of Hanta's mind, a metaphorical glass breaks. Shatters. Spilling water all over the ground. It's a mess. A truly terrible mess. Oh my god, that's so stupid, why would you do that? Monoma sped out quickly, his words just barely not indistinguishably bleeding into each other. He leaned a bit forward, nearly teetering from his place perched on the edge of Jiru's bed. Why would you go upstairs? That's like the worst place to possibly go. Hitoshi snorted. He could feel Izuku's shoulders shake a little from suppressed laughter from where they were both leaned up against each other. Oh, and I supposed you're above the panic and adrenaline of running from a murderous home intruder with no training or experience to speak of? Hitoshi drawled, earning himself a near collective chuckle. But of course, Monoma said completely seriously, crossing his arms. Oh sure, Hitoshi sneered. Wanna bet? What the F does that even mean? What the F does that even mean? Izuku asked incredulously, regretfully leaning away from Hitoshi to fully turn his head and body from the computer screen to properly face Monoma down. Monoma stuck his nose in the air. You heard me. Jiru cackled out a very hyena-esque laugh. Hitoshi distantly noted that he'd have to ask if either of her parents had a hyena-like mutation quirk. He wouldn't be surprised if it were the case. Then, horrifyingly, the incredulous look on Izuku's face slowly started morphing into a more thoughtful and considering one, the look in his eyes becoming just a little bit too sharp for Hitoshi's liking. Hitoshi raised a pointed eyebrow. Nope. Nah. A sudden, collective hush settled over the group, the sound of the pre-quirk slasher film still droning on in the background on Jiru's laptop, the screen's lights still flickering lightly against Jiru's dorm room walls. Everyone turned to look at Izuku as a minor smile creeped on his face. I didn't say anything, Izuku said defensively. Hitoshi scoffed. You were thinking it, Hitoshi shot, taking perhaps an unreasonable amount of joy in the way Izuku's smile grew minutely. I'm sorry, thinking what exactly? Jiru asked snippily, looking between everyone with a subtly growing dread. Monoma himself stayed admirably stone-faced. Izuku, the little sheet, just hummed like he didn't know exactly what Hitoshi was talking about. You are not going to find a way to stage a game where a bunch of people that you'll likely handicap in some way will have to fight and bullshit their way out of a house, or whatever, while slasher-style opponents come at them to reenact the classic pre-quirk slasher films, Hitoshi declared, pointing his finger straight at Izuku and resting it pointedly on his chest. Izuku pouted, batting Hitoshi's hand away as Jiru and Monoma shared a discreet, somewhat apprehensive look. Hitoshi ignored the way Izuku's hand made his own feel all warm and tingly at the contact, however brief. So you're down for literally everything else we've planned for, but you crossed the line at that? Izuku said rather petulantly, nearly whining as he dramatically slumped his shoulders. The hilarious instant regret that was flashing and flickering across Monoma's face like a worn-out street light ceased when he suddenly steeled his eyes bravely. He crossed his arms and puffed out his chest like a particularly proud peacock. I say we do it. In fact, I volunteer, he declared brazenly. Jiru lets out a long, drawn-out sigh. It sounded already defeated. Hitoshi found that rather unfair, as he could really use the backup right about now. As the one getting slashed, of course? Izuku clarified just to be annoying. Hitoshi knew. Of course, Monoma said, clearly biting back the urge to gulp comically. This is just going to happen now, isn't it? Hitoshi asked nobody in particular, rubbing at his brow while the beginnings of a minor headache grew there. Izuku's absolutely dastardly smirk was answer enough. But, as Izuku looked over all his friends, Hitoshi noticed something settle in Izuku, almost like a boiling pot of water was finally taken off the heat, and was now left to sit and rest. Something flickered across Izuku's face, then one that seemed to mute and dull the easy amusement that was radiating from him, and tightened up his once loose, relaxed shoulders. The look was, distinctly, a resolute one. There's something I need to tell all of you, Izuku said seriously, yet almost hesitantly around the edges. It made Hitoshi frown slightly, making him want to reassure Izuku in 100 different ways. He refrained. The entire mood shift was as palpable as it was instant. Chancing a quick look into the eyes of both Monoma and Jiro, all Hitoshi found was their undivided attention resting solely on Izuku. Absently, Jiro leaned forwards, putting the movie that was still playing in the background on pause. In the back of his mind, Hitoshi noted that it was distinctly incredible how easily and fluidly Izuku commanded attention. Yeah. And, sure thing, came the prompt reply, accompanying Hitoshi's own silent nod of encouragement. Izuku blinked a bit owlishly, as if in minor shock, as if he expected something else to happen. Hitoshi will give credit where credit was due. Izuku was able to school his features quickly and wave his clear feelings on the matter off easily and expertly. Didn't change the fact Hitoshi was suddenly overcome with the urge to hunt down every last person who ignored Izuku's existence as if he were a blight, as if he were someone who didn't deserve it. You see, Izuku stuttered a bit. Before taking a steadying breath, there's something I've been hiding from you, all of you. Even Izuku's eyes suddenly flickered up and met Hitoshi's own. Even from you, Hitoshi. There was fear there. Slowly, overtly, Hitoshi reached out his hand, and when Izuku showed no signs of pulling away, he gently rested his hand across Izuku's scarred, warm one. Whatever it is, I promise none of us will react poorly, Hitoshi said with emphasis, hoping his conviction on the matter was received clearly. If one squinted, there was also a subtle, quiet threat lurking underneath his words, pointed directly towards the others like the crosshairs of a firearm. Jiro and Monoma nodded unanimously in easy agreement. The minor titan of Hitoshi's gut loosened at the action. Even if I said I was a villain? Izuku asked challengingly. That admittedly caught Hitoshi off guard for a moment, and his peripheral told him it also took the others by surprise as well. Monoma suddenly let a loose, unbidden laugh free, while Jiro simply rolled her eyes. Midoriya. With all due respect. If you said that we needed to go march off and join the LOV right this second, we'd do it, Monoma stated shamelessly, as if it were an obvious fact. I'd probably at least question you first, but yeah, Jiro agreed doubtlessly, messing with one of her ear jacks as she glanced away for a moment. You'd have a good reason. I would without hesitation, Hitoshi said when it was finally his turn, meaning every word. Even with his dream of becoming a hero on the line. Even with his desire to prove everyone who said he'd be nothing but a villain wrong. Hitoshi'd come to realize there were more important things, like seeking ways to change the wrong where it counted, like sticking it to the corrupt, malicious persons, even if he had to do it, perhaps, the not-so-legal way. Like Izuku. Izuku suddenly faltered, looking very overwhelmed, his brow creasing and eyes widening in the face of such easy, resolute conviction. Particularly, he glanced most at Hitoshi, something unreadable laying in his eyes. Hitoshi wanted to smooth those shocked wrinkles and creases out, wanted to put him at ease. Izuku shook his head out, so clearly baffled, before sighing shortly while an unfairly charming smile crawled onto his lips. Overwhelming gratitude sparked and crackled in his eyes. And so, after another moment, Izuku spoke. Hitoshi already knew this, but I was quirkless for a long time. Izuku said, swallowing his residual nerves down. I didn't actually get a quirk until I was around 14, Izuku admitted quietly. Hitoshi heard Jiro and Monoma take a sharp breath. It was true. Hitoshi did already know this. But Hitoshi felt his eyes widen slightly when he realized that phrasing felt a little too pointed. Get? Not. Monoma latched onto that wording quickly as well. Hitoshi saw Jiro's eyes squint in silent thought. Monoma himself actually looked like he didn't mean to say anything yet. But he continued on regardless. Not develop? Izuku shook his head. I was not born with a quirk. It was given to me, Izuku clarified to the point that it was as clear as crystal. There was a collective pause. Hitoshi unconsciously tightened his hand around Izuku's. From all for one. Izuku just shook his head again slowly, cautiously. From All Might. You're a worthless, pathetic freak of nature, you know that? Some kid with their face blurred crooned as they roughly held a mop of green curly hair viciously tight in their grip. You'll never amount to anything. Just do us all a favor and throw yourself into oncoming traffic, not like anyone will actually miss you. The words were said harshly and with a cruel kind of amusement curling throughout their tone. Malicious laughter rings loud and heavy around the classroom, in audience. Spineless, weak, useless, powerless, coward. You want to be a hero so bad you want to play with the big boys, Deku? The punch to the freckled boy's face was harsh and unforgiving. The hand still latched onto green locks kept his head unrelentingly still. There's a distinct crunch sound, broken nose. Blood trickled down. Laughable. You're just a defenseless little nobody. Your existence insults the actual heroes, the people with actual power. You're not even worth saving. Another hard punch, this one to the stomach. The green-haired boy is finally let go. He catches himself a wheezing, bloody mess, but he doesn't fall. He does not fall. The puddle of water creeps steadily outward. The broken glass shards cut calloused, scarred, broken hands. Blood pools, dripping. Dripping. Toxic, nuclear green eyes blazed so hatefully, so strongly up at his attacker, quiet defiance heavily set in his jaw. The strength of the pure, terrifying, wrath present could level entire cities. Raise mountains. Destroy stars. Implode galaxies. Dripping. Dripping. W. Hanta throws up. Notes. Rolls up with Starbucks 8 months late. So, how's it been? I blame the long wait on life, college, and falling head first into Harry Potter fanfiction LMAO. It's really well and truly grabbed me by the ball, which was shocking as I'd spent literal years reading nearly exclusively MHA fics, and I've barely read any recently. If any of you have any HPFIC recommendations, don't be afraid to hand them over lol. I've also been sitting on half this particular chapter for months. I honestly don't know if it turned out fine or not, but I'm posting it regardless cause it's been collecting dust for far too long. And, you know, it's wild to think about how long this FIC existed. I started writing it in about my junior year of high school, and it was originally only supposed to be a couple chapters long. A near one-and-done type thing. I'm honestly surprised I've managed to keep this story coherent LMAO. Well, anyway, until we meet again. Good morning, and in case I don't see ya, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. Truman. Chapter 18. But satisfaction brought it back. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Soy sauce was acting weird. Now, that alone wasn't saying much. Katsuki was aware Zero, as well as everyone else in his group of fuckheads, tended to lean more towards the annoying and obnoxious side of Sheet, but this had been going on all DMN day long and it was honestly getting ridiculous. Katsuki hadn't been hanging around the nerds recently, what with all the bullshit, so with no distractions underfoot he clocked the set of eyes that lingered on him almost immediately. One look back had Zero looking away quickly, and honestly Katsuki wouldn't be half as annoyed by it as he was if the idiot just owned up to it and didn't shy away like some stray cat in an alley caught rooting through a dumpster. But no. Instead, Katsuki had to deal with the eyes of a FING coward following his every move like a fly he just couldn't swat, as no matter how many times he looked back, glared, or tried to ignore him, the a-hole wouldn't. Stuff again weird. Ridiculous. Annoying. Won't you just quit it already? Katsuki bellowed out suddenly, turning around sharply from his direction, walking down the school hallway and glaring directly at Zero, who did an incredible impression of a spooked frog and jumped what had to be 10 feet off the ground. A couple extras stopped to stare at the commotion, but Katsuki paid them no attention, keeping his focus solely on his stalker. Got something you want to tell me, asshat? Shiro froze for a moment before doing the most awkward, shitty attempt at acting idiotic Katsuki had ever laid witness to. Soy sauce went the whole 9 yards, looking around, pointing to himself as if to say, "Who me?" and generally looking like a effing fool trying his damnedest to act casual. Katsuki hated to tell him, but he couldn't even fool a goldfish with that act. Except Katsuki lied. He didn't hate the prospect, he loved it. Immensely. In fact, he liked the idea so much, he stomped his way up to the walking Scotch tape dispenser and reveled in the deer caught in the headlights expression steadily growing on his face. "Well," Katsuki grunted, getting right up in his face. From how close he was, he could see the beads of a nervous sweat start to pill on Shiro's temples as he stayed infuriatingly silent. Just as Katsuki was wondering if he'd get an answer before the a-hole passed the F out, something in Shiro's expression changed. Shiro took a quick breath before his eyes steeled into a hard expression unfamiliar to Katsuki. No, perhaps not unfamiliar. It was the look of someone mentally prepping for a hard-won, difficult task. Katsuki just didn't expect to see it here. "I need to talk to you." In private, Shiro stated with stiff shoulders. Katsuki noted the slight waver in his voice, but the tone still held heavy and strong. "It's something important." Katsuki took a second to look at Shiro. Really look at him. The guy looked like he was just drafted into a FANG war. "Lead on, then," Katsuki responded after a pause, forcing a sarcastic drawl that didn't come to him nearly as naturally as he wanted. Something about the air felt charged with a simmering energy that Katsuki hadn't noticed before. It wafted off Shiro like a storm cloud, trailing behind as he walked, and making it slightly more difficult for Katsuki to take a full, steady breath. Something about it felt eerily familiar. "Know what I need to prov?" It didn't take long for them to come across a deserted hallway. It was after classes, after all, and not many students usually chose to linger. It was in a small alcove that Shiro decided to stop at, to which Katsuki followed in silently. "You didn't have to stare my butt down all effing day just for a chat, you know," Katsuki remarked, crossing his arms as he leaned back against the wall. "So, what did you drag me all the way over here for?" Shiro didn't say anything in response, just looked vaguely to the side in what looked like deep thought. Normally that'd piss Katsuki off like no tomorrow, but something about the odd intensity of the moment tempered his usual impatience. Suddenly, Shiro took a deep, long breath before pulling out his phone. He took a second to tap through it, hesitating a moment more, before lifting the phone up and turning the screen to show Katsuki its contents. It was a video. Hashtag, "You're a worthless, pathetic freak of nature, you know that?" Katsuki could feel the blood as it drained from his face, like it could run and duck for cover from what Katsuki was looking at. No small part of Katsuki wanted to do just that at that moment. "You and Midoriya are childhood friends," Shiro stated like a simple fact, voice distant and somewhere far away as the video footage continued to play. "You went to the same junior high, were in the same year, and took all of the same classes." Katsuki didn't respond. Instead, he stared squarely at the screen as if hypnotized mind whirring a mile a minute. "Where were you?" Shiro asked simply, pulling up a social media account that was marked as hidden, invite only. Shiro took a minute to just scroll through the account in view of where Katsuki could see most videos starring one certain green curly-haired middle schooler. "The video I initially saw, it wasn't just a one-off. All I could think, looking through some of them, was, where was Bakugo? Where were Midoriya's friends?" Shiro turned the phone fully towards himself once more, seemingly trying to find something specific. Shiro looked incredibly disturbed looking at each thumbnail, appearing slightly green around the gills, but forced himself to look anyway. It seemed like it took a great deal of effort. Katsuki himself was using a shit ton of effort refraining from just grabbing the phone and blowing up the DMN thing, so he didn't have to look at whatever else Shiro was digging up. Didn't have to see. "And I finally found you, you know," Shiro nearly whispered, voice brittle like shattered glass. "After looking through way too many of these, I finally got my answer." The video Shiro clicked on and turned back towards Katsuki was a more recent one compared to the others. Katsuki noted Shiro's hand trembled slightly and focused on it. trying desperately to distract himself with anything else. But there was no hiding from what was right in front of him. Their younger Katsuki was standing on the sidelines, watching with a vaguely disgusted expression as some extra ruthlessly beat Izuku down. Like the weakness sickened him. And it had, at the time. It had been a long while since Katsuki had seen Izuku like that. Sure, he'd seen him bruised and broken worse than what should be possible for continued survival, but those were all due to competitions, to villain fights. Katsuki didn't remember this being so visceral, so cruel. Katsuki knew now that what he'd done to Izuku was as far from heroic as something could get. He knew he'd hurt him, logically, but to see it through shitty camera footage after the fact? To watch an entire crowd of people stand by and just laugh? The worst part was that Katsuki knew full well this was hardly close to his worst offense. He could think of countless more putting in only the barest amount of thoughtful recollection. Distance and time gave him a new perspective, and that perspective seared his eyes and made his veins freeze cold. Where'd you find this? Katsuki had to know which a-hole posted all this, so he knew who to drag down with him, because Izuku didn't deserve this. He didn't deserve what Katsuki had done, and he didn't deserve to have it spread around where any creepy BSTRD could watch. That's what you lead with? Ifan, really? Shiro spat incredulously, trying to cover your sorry but already? Is that all you are, Bakugo? A bully and a coward? You don't know what the F you're talking about. Katsuki growled darkly, taking a step closer. I know exactly what I'm talking about. Shiro yelled back sharply, you're afraid of what might happen if this gets out? Proof of what you truly are? How deep does this sheet-hole go, Bakugo? He doesn't deserve every a-hole on the FING internet to see this. Katsuki started but was ruthlessly cut off. And you don't deserve to just walk away from this. Shiro spat, voice going high and reedy. I should take this to Principal Nedzu right now, make everyone aware of exactly what you did. Then why the F, haven't you already, huh? Katsuki sniped, trying to ruthlessly stamp down on the sudden influx of an icy guilt-addled anxiety that just poured down his spine. This wasn't about him. Why come to me first? Shiro's mouth suddenly clamped shut, making an audible click sound as he swallowed hard. He suddenly looked incredibly nervous, Katsuki might even say terrified. In every video people are always making fun of Midoriya for being quirkless. Shiro stuttered slightly, fumbling his way through the words like it physically pained him to talk about. The only logical conclusion is he either hid that he had a quirk, which doesn't make sense, or that he was a late bloomer at 14, which also doesn't make much sense. I just need to know, Shiro begged. I need to know how likely Midoriya was to go to someone like... He cut himself off, choking on his own words. Someone like what? Katsuki muttered deeply in confusion, before his eyes widened slightly when he finally caught up to what Shiro was likely implying. No, it's not, you idiot. Someone like All for One. God FING, damn it. K-do-me, Yuga muttered softly before he could restrain himself, clamping his mouth shut too late with both hands. He sequestered himself more by shuffling further down into his nook, sacrificing a more clear hearing ability, but securing more cover, hoping to whatever god was out there he wasn't noticed. He had never been made aware of that. He wasn't told a lot, hardly much, but that seemed like a pretty significant thing to be made aware of. Yuga could feel himself hold back a manic reaction that could have equally either been a laugh or a cry. He knew dear Midoriya was once quirkless. It was painfully obvious. And as one person who lived the quirkless life to another, he kept that knowledge soundly to himself. Even from, no, you, Fanji sheet? Bakugo floundered uncharacteristically, clearly flustered. So it's a real possibility, then? Shiro muttered so frightfully and quietly Yuga almost didn't pick it up. Sheet. We're actually so F'd. Yuga agreed with the sentiment. He knew now he'd be crying openly if he could. We're not F'd, you idiot, Bakugo ground out snappily before sighing heavily. He didn't go to that baked potato-looking freak, all right? He didn't do that. And how do you know that? Shiro cried out with a hysterical edge. Do you just think it? Midoriya looked very effing scary in some of those videos and is very effing scary. You're the one who came here asking for my opinion, dipshit. Bakugo yelled rather loudly, so are you gonna listen, or are you gonna needlessly freak out? Needlessly? Yuga cringed at just how thunderous Zero said that. What part of this situation doesn't need freaking out? Because I didn't happen. Bakugo shouted with an obvious frustrated edge, a small crackle of explosions following his words. Yuga needed to get out of there. He didn't mean to start eavesdropping. He didn't. He just got a sensitive call he couldn't put off even if he wanted, and then they just showed up. But he couldn't think of a way to stealthily escape without immediately being spotted, and he feared being questioned, so he stayed put. Like a good little mole. He couldn't be questioned like that. Not even suspected. He'd break. Immediately. He wanted to live. My buddy, my chum, my pal? Zero drawled in such a sickly sweet tone Yuga almost choked. That doesn't tell me anything. And you're not letting me get a word out, hole? And Bakugo's point is soundly made when Zero interrupts again. Midoriya could be a villain for all I know, and if you're covering for him just to avoid. But Zero didn't get to say what Bakugo was trying to avoid as there was a sudden whooshing, snatching sound in the air and two identical shouts of surprise. Yuga furrowed his brows in momentary confusion, before the voice that followed shook him to his core. And what, might I ask, is going on over here? Aizawa-sensei's unimpressed voice cut through the air like a toll bell, turning Yuga's blood to ice as frozen as the Arctic's ocean. Shouldn't you be on your way back to the dorms? The school halls aren't a good place to obnoxiously scream out your issues. Anyone could be listening in. There was a deafening silence. Part of Yuga yearned to see what was happening, but a larger, much more frightened part wished he wasn't here at all. If Aizawa-sensei caught him now, well, that would just be it, wouldn't it? Logically, Yuga knew getting caught in a bout of eavesdropping wasn't the worst, especially if it's just between classmates. It makes him look overly curious and perhaps too flippant with others' privacy at worst. But Yuga was not a strong person. He wasn't assured. He wasn't confident. Not with the things that truly mattered. If anyone looked too closely, saw too much, got even a bit suspicious, Yuga was sure he'd crumble into tiny little insignificant pieces at the slightest tap. He was a good actor, a great one, but only when people solely paid attention to his performance. Yuga was startled out of his doom spiral by Bakugo loudly clicking his tongue. Zero's the one who dragged me over here, and the one being an idiot. Oh, Zero started before being stopped short by Aizawa-sensei clearing his throat. I'm not interested in who started what, Aizawa-sensei said impatiently, his tone growing with a barely contained intensity Yuga just now noticed was there. Why would you think Midoriya a villain? He's not, Bakugo growled out like a beast. He was quirkless. Zero suddenly declared. He was quirkless by 14 and got a quirk that destroys himself out of nowhere. Feeling his legs going weak, Yuga put his head in his hands, sliding down to the ground as he focused on keeping himself as hidden and imperceptible as possible. There's no scenario where he didn't go to that all-for-one freak, and no scenario where that doesn't make him a villain working for him. Yuga bit his lip to stop the sob that threatened to spill out of his throat. He could taste blood on his tongue. The hall went silent once more, the quiet only being broken up by Zero's almost violent panting. Zero sounded keenly on the verge of tears, of breaking down more than he already had. And I'm telling you that's not what happened, Bakugo stubbornly grumbled. Don't look at me like that, Sens. Aizawa-sensei let out could probably be felt all over Japan. Bakugo went silent again. We clearly need to work on your communication skills, Bakugo, Aizawa-sensei chastised pointedly, and I must say, I'm curious about what you might want to possibly avoid. Zero suddenly barked out a mean laugh. Yuga was privately with him on that. The issue you have stumbled upon, Zero, is one of high confidentiality. However, I assure you, Midoriya is neither a villain, nor does he have a quirk because All for One gave him one, Aizawa-sensei stated clearly, leaving no room for doubt. Yuga felt his shoulders droop with palpable relief, a soft sigh escaping his lips. He wiped his damp eyes with one of the hands still covering his face. Wait, you know? Bakugu asked so incredulously it almost made Yuga laugh. Aizawa-sensei apparently saw fit to ignore him as he merely moved on. I will, however, need you both to follow me to Principal Nedzu's office where we can continue to discuss this matter. I also preemptively ask that you, Shiro, will not go digging into this affair and be content with whatever Nedzu chooses to share with you, Aizawa-sensei requested, though it sounded much more like a command. Bakugu already knows the stakes and knows to stay quiet about it. Both students grunted after a moment, both sounding subdued. Come along, then, Aizawa-sensei drawled, the edge that had built up in his tone never really receding. Yuga noted the sound of footsteps, the sound of which echoing, but getting quieter and quieter. They weren't coming his way. Nobody had noticed. Thenko? Oh my! What a clever hiding spot. It was just one thing after the other these days, wasn't it? Nedzu was getting a little sick of it, if he were to be completely honest with himself. He was on his way back up to his office after discussing something with Recovery Girl when he got a notification from Aizawa indicating he was dealing with a matter that involved OFA. It was a very new system, one Nedzu had hoped wouldn't need to be used anytime soon. But not everyone gets what they want, now do they? So Nedzu picked up his pace slightly, and looking through the cameras from his phone revealed Aizawa and those involved were conveniently in his direct path already. Devil's luck, perhaps. So it was by pure chance he glanced to the side and saw Aoyama curled up on the ground a short distance away from the group. Eavesdropping distance, one might say. And if it weren't for the pure, world-shattering fear that smeared across Aoyama's face at that purposely semi-pointed statement, or the quick glance at where a very hidden camera was supposed to be down the hall, he wouldn't have pressed more than he would have any other eavesdropping student in this instance. It's a nice blind spot from our school cameras, isn't it? Nedzu asked rhetorically. Aoyama looked like his eulogy was being recited right to his face. My, if you spoke quietly enough, I doubt even our speakers could pick up anything at all. By this point Aizawa had already turned around, looking vaguely surprised, if a little confused at seeing Nedzu there. The students looked similarly. Nedzu gestured for Aoyama to step out of the nook. And as Aoyama slowly stood and walked out on trembling fawn legs, Aizawa's expression turned from confused to straight-up shocked. So, good stealth capabilities, huh? I didn't, Yuga stuttered. I didn't know that. Yuga then suddenly laughed in a slightly hysterical and strained manner. That's certainly a concerning security issue, Nedzu-sensei, Aoyama stated nervously, glancing at Aizawa, before his gaze skittered away. If you know about it, why? Then how would I catch on to the people who are looking for them? Nedzu queried brightly. A quite clever trick, if Nedzu did say so himself, even if it did have its faults. For example, Aoyama obviously knew of the blind spots scattered around, or at the very least, knew of this one, but Nedzu did not realize he actually knew this, as while Nedzu had seen Aoyama take calls in this nook before, he had also seen many other students do the same. Aoyama specifically tended to just take calls in whatever semi-private place was convenient, as many of the other students who have also used the blind spots tend to do as well. He might have a system to tell him whenever anyone ever uses a blind spot, but it doesn't tell him if it was used purposefully. It did not tell him if the perpetrator took into account Nedzu could be aware, and throw red herrings in to trip him up. The look of pure doom on Aoyama's face told Nedzu all he needed to know, however. On to the matter of why. If you could please follow me, Aoyama. I believe you already understand the reasoning for such a request. Nedzu questioned as he started walking towards Aizawa and the other students. Aoyama took it for what it was, a command, and dutifully followed Nedzu with slightly dragging legs. What the F dash? Bakugu remarked rather bluntly. Shiro merely gaped. You, Aoyama, have remarkable clandestine expertise, Aizawa mentioned with a minor note of unsettlement leaking through. Where was that during practical heroics lessons? Aoyama himself merely stayed silent, taking great pains to not look any of them in the eye. His form trembled slightly, like a leaf in a breeze. I believe, Aizawa, that this situation here just became a lot more complicated, Nedzu announced. Aoyama flinched. Aizawa just looked tired. Wary. Welcome to the club. Hey, All Might. Izuku asked over the phone, nervously looking back at his friends. He caught Hitoshi's eye, who smiled at him in support and reassurance. Jairu gave a thumbs up, whereas Minona just rolled his eyes with a small smirk. Izuku felt his own appreciative grin tug at his lips. Hello. Yes, young Midoriya? Are you all right? All Might asked. For all intents and purposes he sounded as he usually did, though Izuku was able to pick up a slight hint of fatigue in his tone. Izuku wondered if he was eating enough, getting enough sleep. If he wasn't, Izuku would have to call him a hypocrite again, and nobody wanted that. Yes, I'm fine, Izuku reassured. I do have to tell you something important, though. Can we meet up soon? In private? What a coincidence, young Midoriya. I actually need to speak with you as well. All Might trailed off strangely. Izuku also picked up a slight hint of fake enthusiasm present in his tone. Now Izuku was really getting worried, which must have shown on his face, because Hitoshi looked at him with blatant concern. Before Izuku could say anything more though, All Might piped back up again. I'll give you more information about the schedule after class tomorrow. It's a meeting with Nedzu, you see. Are you okay with telling me then? Yeah, I'm good with that, Izuku conceded easily, not having any reason not to. See you tomorrow? See you. Have a good rest of your day, young Midoriya. That, at least, sounded natural. Izuku let himself smile slightly. You too, Izuku responded, before hanging up. So, Monoma stage whispered even though he had literally no reason to. You telling him soon? Izuku chuckled slightly, any weird tension he got from the call dissipating immediately. Yep. That's good, Hitoshi said, scooting closer to lean into Izuku's space. Means you won't have to worry about it anymore. Here, Jur drawled, holding up nothing like one would a champagne glass in a toast, which made everyone snort. You looked a little worried there for a second, though, Hitoshi noted. Is everything else okay? Izuku thought about it for a moment, before shrugging slowly, leaning back into Hitoshi more. Guess I'll find out soon,